Well, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for everybody for joining us today. This will be the last Ignite Talks for 2020, and we're building our schedule for next year, so be on the lookout for that. But we're really very fortunate to have Jim Adler join us for today's Ignite Talks. Jim is a nationally recognized expert on topics including privacy and security and AI and robotics. But not only is he an expert in these fields, in addition, as you will learn, he's a very colorful character, and as a result is frequently asked to present or be a guest speaker or be a keynote. So delighted that he accepted our invitation. I first met Jim about 20 years ago when I participated in a $10.8 million financing for Vote Here, which was an electronic voting company that Jim had founded. Ironically, that financing closed, I believe, 3 days after the 2000 contested presidential election between Bush and Gore. And I'll let Jim tell us more about that experience and the hype that ensued. Prior to Vote Here, as we were previously discussing, Jim was launching rockets for Lockheed Martin. After Vote Here, he went on and held senior positions with several companies, including VP of Privacy with Intellius and Chief Privacy Officer with Microsoft before joining Toyota. In addition to his role with Toyota AI Ventures, he is on the Department of Homeland Security's Data Privacy and Integrity Advisory Committee, that's a mouthful, and on JetBlue's Technology Venture Investment Community. Jim describes his career as spanning many acts, and he buckets them into 3 different categories: geek, suit, and wonk, and in that order. In today's talk, we'll learn more about Jim's background, his focus at Toyota, some of his key investment criteria, some of the investments he's made, and more. I hope Jim will also share some guidance that he might have for entrepreneurs and startups in the Spokane region. This is intended to be interactive and questions are expected. If you have a question, please submit it to me in the chat box and I will queue it up for you. And be sure to unmute yourself in advance. So with that, Jim, let's get started.
Well, thanks, Tom. That was a great introduction. Hey, let me make one correction. I wasn't Chief Privacy Officer at Microsoft. I was Chief Privacy Officer at Intellius. I was a principal at Microsoft.
Okay, well,
Thanks for the promotion,
though. Okay, so part of my first question is, what did I miss in your background? Are there any holes in there that you ought to elaborate on? And then, provide a little bit of insight as to why you bucket your career into these categories of geek, suit, and wonk.
Yeah, I think you captured the career pretty well. It does sort of run this thread of starting very technically, electrical engineer. I've been a tinkerer my whole life, from the very early days. I went as a teenager, taking cars apart and motorcycles and mini bikes, and that's how I found myself into engineering. And as we were talking before we started, found myself in the middle of launching rockets for what's now Lockheed Martin. I was General Dynamics Space Systems back in the day, but they were acquired by Lockheed. And it was just an amazing time to be in the space industry right out of school. You're at the bottom of a 300-foot booster, and you're launching a satellite for. In those days, it was mostly the military, typically the Air Force, and you're in charge of a system, and you have $1 billion on this stack, and some general is talking, is going to ask this 26-year-old kid, "Are you good to go?" And you're just like, "Yes," shaking in your boots, to stop the, would you ever stop the launch of this rocket? And that was great. And I had an amazing amount of time, but I had this entrepreneurial itch that I really wanted to scratch. And you can see in my career, it's been kind of hard to hold a boss over this period. I always am sort of, anxious and curious about what's next. And I've had this, wonderful career that, I get to learn from great people like you, Tom, in my career. Those lessons I take to this day. And then I just am a curious person, and I just went from being purely an engineer into business, where I noticed a lot of the things were similar. My father was a doctor and my grandfather was a doctor, and I was supposed to be a doctor. And I broke their heart when I became an engineer, because they didn't even know what an engineer was in the mid '80s. They thought I would be driving a train. And I kind of had to explain what an engineer was. But it's interesting, I became this systems engineer, right? I became a control systems engineer, which is a generalist, right? I wasn't a specialist, I was a generalist. And if you look at their career in medicine, they were both internists. One emergency room physician, another was an internist, which are generalists in the medical field. And so I try to run away from their professions, and I found myself right back where they were, being a generalist. And I found that a lot of those lessons in engineering, understand how systems work, understanding the difference between linear response and nonlinear response and stochastic systems, did really apply to business in many respects. And I've really, that has kind of helped inform the business career and how I even assess companies. And then I found myself sort of getting dropped into the more policy world with privacy and the legal world, which I also found really intriguing and interesting, and was able to bring both business and engineering ideas to the privacy world, where privacy professionals had to manage technology systems that they didn't often really understand. So I get to be this stranger in a strange land, bringing these ideas to these areas that are often very homogeneous in their practitioners. And I always can usually bring something that is novel. And I think that's kind of informed the career. So I was sort of the accidental privacy officer. Then I found myself at Toyota being the accidental venture capitalist.
Okay. Well, your career, though, with an engineering background, your experience as an entrepreneur and starting a company, your suit time, all gives you a pretty good quiver of experience for being an effective venture capitalist and a value-added venture capitalist. But let's tell us a little bit more about Vote Here, which was your first startup that I was involved with. But you really, in your words, was essentially a blockchain company. You're a pioneer using multi-party crypto computation. Tell us about that experience, and then maybe even imagine for a little bit, had that technology been broadly deployed, what would this presidential election perhaps look like? And to let people know, this was a well-funded startup in electronic voting backed by technology leaders, Cisco and Hewlett Packard.
That's right, Tom. And we didn't call it blockchain back then. We weren't as slick marketers. Like as Tom said, we called it multi-party crypto computation. But a voting system is really a measurement device for measuring the decision of the electorate. And it's a really unique cryptography problem, because you have to simultaneously keep the ballot secret, but also make sure the election results can be audited. And so it's a really difficult crypto problem, which is why I was drawn to it, and our team really dug into it. Because we felt like in an election, the audit is really difficult, because everyone's at cross purposes. I like to say the inmates are running the asylum in an election, right? You have Democrats and Republicans that are both on their party members are on the ballots, and they have to count the ballots, and so it's a very contentious environment. And then the added layer of keeping the voters' ballot secret is really difficult. And so we thought this would be, a really hard problem that democracies needed to solve. And I think that the challenge that I think we nailed the technology, and I'll talk to that to get to the second part of your question, Tom, on how it would affect today. But the challenge in the market was that, like any investor, you want to invest in really big, broken markets that can be disrupted. And I think these markets are big and broken for sure. But the key is they need to be ready to be disrupted. And there's many markets that are big and broken, but they're not ready to be disrupted. And I think this market was one of those. And we didn't really appreciate how inaccessible that market would become, or would be at the time, and it still is. And when I look at companies now, I look at, okay, how accessible is this market for disruption? The automotive market more than 10 years ago was not really that accessible to startup disruption. It's only become now accessible to startup disruption. Government markets are tough to break into, and I think this was the challenge with Vote Here. However, we did inspire a lot of folks, and we did punch above our weight in a lot of ways. We opened our technology for review by any university that wanted to review it. And we had some great folks from MIT, specifically in Ron Rivest's cryptography group. I don't know if you know RSA security, but Ron Rivest is the R in RSA. And he had this great team of PhDs that combed through our crypto protocols and really I'm proud to say, was impressed. And most of that should be put at the feet of our chief scientist, Andy Neff, who's still in the Pacific Northwest. And what was interesting is there was one PhD student, his name was Benedita, and he went on to run engineering at Square and Clever, a Sequoia-backed ed tech company. He quit all that to found a nonprofit recently, and promulgate this idea called risk limiting audits, which was very much based on the way Vote Here approached audits 20 years ago. And Ben's company is actually now involved in the recount in Georgia. If you go to the Secretary's website in Georgia, you can see risk limiting audits, and I think he's got a press release from Ben there. And I'm very proud that even 20 years ago, Dom, when we were really breaking our pick on this market, we inspired a lot of people about how elections can be more audited and more trustworthy for the electorate that's choosing our leaders.
Yep. It was a great team. And I really like what you say about markets. Are they big enough, ready enough, and broken and willing to be fixed? And it seems to me that the election market just wasn't ready enough. But I would guess that sometime in our remaining lifetimes, they will be ready enough. And I think once upon a time, you said that part of the problem was that the inmates were running the prison. And that was somewhat problematic in getting widespread adoption for Vote Here.
Yeah, I think, I mean, when you look at the, it's sort of a bank shot market, right? On the one hand, the customers are the state and local election officials, but the politicians that regulate elections, they're the ones that are on the ballot. And they don't really like a lot of change because the existing system is what got them elected. So if there needs to be any improvement to the election system, then that may, in some tangential way, impugn their legitimacy. And so we sort of had, we really understood and worked well with the state and local customers, the election officials, because they just want a clean count. Our challenge was often political. And I think when you look at difficult markets and why they're inaccessible, it's often because the customers aren't the ones making a big enough influence on the purchasing decision. And I think that's one of these. And you know, I've done many replays of Vote Here, right? You know, you learn much more from difficult startups than the successful ones, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And I did a lot of postmortem on Vote Here, and I think that's really was one of our difficulties, was winning over the politics and the buying customer.
Yep. Well, those are all learning experiences. I do want to move on to Toyota AI Ventures next, but I do have one question from Mark Russell at Hypersciences, and he didn't quite hear me correctly. It's geek, suit, and wonk, not wonk. But Mark, what's your question?
Yeah, well, it's just I couldn't quite hear it, but just how you see yourself, you know, in those roles. And I think this is a big deal. And, you know, Tom's invested in a company that we're trying to disrupt some big markets that some are and some aren't ready to change. So any insights for methods to do that? So sorry, two-part question, Tom.
That's okay.
Yeah, well, so on the geek, suit, and wonk idea, I think that many markets become very homogeneous, right? They don't appreciate kind of alien DNA, right? And so you can often, if you bring alien DNA into a market, you can often see things that no one sees, and I think there's incredible value there, and the challenge is, one, seeing the value, but also then realizing the value in that market, right? I tell my startups all the time, I'm glad that you're creating value, but are you capturing the value that you're creating? And you can argue that in certain markets, those that create the value are not capturing it. And so I don't, you know, I think when you bring in different perspectives, you can actually come up with almost wormhole-like solutions that just kind of cut through, you know, huge swaths of space and time, because you've thought about it very differently. I remember when we were when I was at Intellius, they were coming under incredible scrutiny for mostly sales processes, but then the privacy got dragged into a lot of the scrutiny. And by just focusing on the systems engineering part of the business, that really defanged a lot of the criticism, because they expected this company to just be a spin machine. So when the press came in and the regulators came in, they just expected spin. And they hit me, and I was just like, well, this is what we're doing. This is the regulation. This is how we're adjusting it. This is how you can measure us. And, you know, and we just kept, you know, meeting with them periodically. And pretty soon, all the gas came out of the criticism, because we were just performing relative to what we needed to, and they weren't seeing the spin they were expecting. And it really just, and when I joined that company, it was a mess, right? The Better Business Bureau had them at an F. They had the Senate Commerce Committee investigating them. They had several class actions, many AGs investigating. That's the company I joined. I was only going to stay there a year, but they wanted me to stay longer. And I said, well, if I'm helping, I'll stay. Well, I ended up staying almost 5 years, and the company went from an F to an A+ in BBB rating. All the lawsuits went away. All the investigations went away. The company ended up being sold twice, because there was a regulated piece and an unregulated piece of the business for several $100 million. So it ended up being quite a good outcome, but I think it required a level of practicality to actually realize that exit.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Perfect. Yeah. Thanks, Mark. Well, let's move on to Toyota AI Ventures. I believe you founded that in roughly 2017. You've made over 25 investments. You know, what are your focus areas? What are the themes, investment themes that you're looking at right now? I know it's somewhat beyond just automotive, but tell us about what you're looking at.
Sure. So it's now 36 investments, Tom. Wow. And so we're moving pretty quickly. And so we're an early stage fund. We do seed and Series A investments. in areas that, of course, artificial intelligence is in our name, but also autonomy, mobility, robotics, data, and cloud technologies. Our mission is really to discover what might be next for Toyota. If you know Toyota's history, Toyota actually pivoted to cars in the 1930s after spending the initial segment of its life as an industrial textile making machine company. So Toyota used to make looms. And in the 30s, the company pivoted to cars. And the grandson of the founder, Akio Toyoda, is the president of the company today. And that entrepreneurial energy actually still survives. I mean, Akio is incredibly entrepreneurial, and he has a lot of interest in what might be next for Toyota. So because I'm a relative newbie at Toyota, I mean, I was there, I've been there 4 years last May. And I bring this entrepreneurial perspective, and our fund is really this kind of at the semi-permeable membrane of the company, right? Inside the company, there's 370,000 employees that generate $250 billion a year in sales, huge company. But our job is to look outward. Our job is to look into new areas, new markets that completely may be unforeseen businesses for Toyota. And so we have pretty broad remit on what we get to invest in. And if you look at our portfolio, yeah, we have some autonomous vehicle stuff, but we have some really, you would think, kind of out there investments like Mootify, which is software-defined fragrances, which comes out of 10 years of research from the Weizmann Institute in Israel. Our view is, well, sight and sound is really important, but smell is important too. And it actually is a direct path right to your brain. And olfactory sensation can really affect people. And we think that could help keep people alert, calm them down, and do all kinds of interesting things. So yeah, we're all over the map. So happy to kind of dive into any one of those areas.
Do you have any investments in the healthcare, life sciences field?
Good question. We just actually announced our first digital health deal in a company called Summer Bio, and it's a COVID testing company that actually was spun out of one of our startups, and it's robotic high throughput COVID testing. Okay. And they are doing like amazing work, ramping up the testing infrastructure in our country. They have some huge contracts for testing, big organizations. I don't want to say who they are because I don't think they may not have announced them all yet, but they're really huge, like tens of millions of dollars in opportunity and so they are moving fast. Like I always say, the only superpower a startup has is speed. Yep. And in healthcare, it's tough. It's tough to be fast. But COVID is actually putting a bit of a tailwind into the digital health sector. Yep. Emergency use authorizations are obviously being utilized quite frequently now. And I think that's giving some of these companies a toehold to fast development and fast market traction.
Okay. The reason I ask is because Spokane really has a cluster of healthcare, device, life sciences companies. You may not be aware, but Spokane now has 2 medical students. There are more medical students in Spokane than in Seattle. Wow. And there are a couple of companies, in that industry cluster that are doing things in artificial intelligence. And so I may follow up with you on 1 or 2 of those.
Yeah, I definitely want to hear. I think, from our perspective, what scares us or gives us pause is, protracted FDA certification, right? I mean, if it doesn't require that kind of certification, we tend to be.
None of these do. And those sort of companies scare me as well.
Yeah.
We have a question from Chris Bleasner, and Chris is kind of a serial entrepreneur here in Spokane. the last year or two has launched his second startup in the cloud computing area. Chris, fire away.
Thanks, Tom. Jim, so Toyota was a customer of SecondWatch, the last company that I had created around cloud management, and was more of a managed service provider and migration partner. They also held the record for the longest deal for us to close. And for startups, that's a killer, right?
Yeah.
The longer it takes for us to get in and provide value to customers, it was literally a 2-year deal. What are you doing, and how do you sort of rationalize that with Toyota and say, okay, well, you mentioned speed is the superpower of startups. It is, but if it takes 2 years to get in, that can also be a killer. And so how do you sort of figure that out?
Yeah, well, great question, Chris, and it's one that is at the top of my list of ways to help Toyota be more responsive. So let me answer it in two parts. The first part is as a venture fund, we cannot move at a typical Toyota speed. So our fund is a separate fund. We're a GPLP structure. We're structured very much like a typical venture capital fund, right? We have a capital call process. We have a very small investment committee. We've moved, I think the fastest we moved on a deal was 2 weeks. One of our metrics is how many times are we the last one to close and wire? And I don't want to be the last one, because we really view the startup as our customer. Like I talked about the semi-permeable membrane, right? The outward side is the startup, and ultimately the startup is our customer. I view the startup as our customer that we need to serve. The company is our limited partner, and we need to return capital and strategic value. And so we move quick on the venture side. You're talking about the business side, and which I appreciate the question. Now, the good news is that there are 370,000 employees at Toyota, many business units. Some are much more entrepreneurial than others. And that's commensurate with certainly the culture of the group, as well as the constraints that they're under. Obviously, if there's safety concerns, they're going to go slower. When risk is high, you got to go slow. You got to be careful, right? You can't have speed and perfection at the same time. However, when risks are low, the company should move faster, and that's been our push. And so we have a team that is our post-close team that really marries the startup with the appropriate business unit. So we do this matchmaking where the groups that can tolerate more immaturity but are willing to move faster, we matchmake with the startups a level of maturity. So certain groups are not going to be wanting to work with a startup that doesn't have tens of millions in revenue and is got a fat balance sheet. Others actually, even on the manufacturing side, are really entrepreneurial, and they'll work with a startup that's really early. And pay for POCs and get them going through the process to move more quickly. So it's kind of a mixed bag, and you kind of need a Sherpa to sort of guide you through Toyota and make sure that you don't burn too much time.
Thank you.
You bet.
So Jim, I'm kind of reading through some of your materials. One of your theme is that the companies that you invest in have to be delivering something that's 10x differentiated on the market. And that's kind of a theme I really buy into. Can you kind of highlight to the group here what that means to you?
Yeah. So, it's the question of, medicine or vitamin, right? I mean, which is an old VC saw. But, if the company is not delivering a medicine, and it's only a vitamin, it's kind of good, it's okay, it's incrementally better. There's a couple problems with that. One is the value proposition for the early customers isn't there. And also you're susceptible to being eclipsed by competition quite easily. And so it's almost like, if you look at, I'll use a Pacific Northwest metaphor, why do salmon spawn with so many eggs. they, you know, like orders of magnitude more than you think they would need because there's tremendous attrition. And so when I look at a deal, I want to see tremendous value creation because you know there'll be attrition down the line. We have a company that you know is clearly an order of magnitude or more on throughput and power. It's a chip company. Company is called Recogni. Great company, and they're doing more than an order of magnitude than the competition. But the chip's not available yet. And, you know, and we believe in the technology that the company's using to achieve those levels, but we know stuff happens, right? We know that as the chip gets manufactured, that order of magnitude, it may not, you know, if they start at 20x, it might come down to 10 and then 8. And so it gives you a, as Buffett says, a margin of safety on the company that buys you a lot of value. It buys you value with customers. Like customers are not going to change unless it's hugely competitive. It's almost like getting over that startup friction. If you come into a customer and say, hey, this isn't just a little better than what you're using now,
Yep.
this is 10 times better than what you're using now, or it's a tenth the cost, or both, 100 times more value. That is going to provide the customer the political argument to change, because nothing is worse than inertia. And a startup is going to have to take that inertia and stop it and turn it. And sometimes the market gives you that inertia. And so timing is really important, but a company can't control the market. They can control their product. And so we really look for that kind of productivity and value creation.
Yep. Makes sense. We have a question from, I may pronounce the name incorrectly, so don't hold me accountable, but Pranav?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
That's almost 99.9% accurate.
Good. That's the first time ever in my life.
Excellent. Pranav, what's your question?
Yeah, so Jim, I was asking, do you provide investment into technologies which are related to automobile industry, but not software based or AI based, so like materials? I work on coatings development. I did a lot of work on corrosion resistant coatings, smart coating materials, and I think they're directly applicable to automobile industry. So are there funds available for those kind of work?
We have looked at materials companies. I think we always have two hats, right? You got to recognize that when I said we're structured like a venture capital fund, I meant it, which means that we look for, you know, big productivity, big markets, and relatively fast growth. I mean, we're, you know, like every VC, we're a 10-year fund. We have a 5-year investment horizon, and then 5-year to, you know, to exit these deals. So we look at, you know, what is the ramp of some of these companies, and we know this isn't pure software. If you look at our portfolio, yeah, many of them are pure software, many of them are not. And so the question that we have on materials deals is, what's the plan? What's the growth rate? Where do we see the potential exit? And so it's not like we're averse to them at all. But, you know, what is the growth look like? And also I think for materials deals that are just focused on automotive, I know we're an automotive venture capital fund. A lot of times automotive is not the most attractive first market. Like I tell our startups, I know I'm Toyota, and I know you think that you want to sell to Toyota, or you think that we want you to sell to Toyota or sell to automotive. We just want you to be successful.
Yeah.
Right, in the market. It doesn't have to be an automotive, right? If you're successful in another market and you want to circle back to Toyota, hey, we're still going to be here. Okay. So go make hay in the market, get financially strong, get mature, and then come back to automotive or come back to Toyota. And I think sometimes that's the right order of operations, and waiting you know, if you look at any automotive, I mean, there's a new platform every 5 years, you know, when there's, annual model years. So it's a long slog in automotive. And I just want startups to understand that, even though you think I want to hear, hey, we're going to automotive. My financial hat says, that's a long road.
Yeah, that's true. So the technology doesn't only cater to automobile. It caters to automobile also. It caters to wide variety of platforms.
Great.
It's
Well, shoot me a note.
yeah.
Shoot me a note. Happy to take a look.
That will be great. Thanks.
Yeah, you bet.
So, one thing that you've said that I really like that is kind of your philosophy as a VC with Toyota is that as you make investments, there's kind of two outcomes. Either you win as a shareholder because the company did well, or you learn some lessons if it doesn't. Now, I think that's really a great philosophy, and it's probably one that most traditional VCs wouldn't be able to say. But given your more strategic investing philosophy, I think is a really good one.
This is where I think the cross or multidisciplinary approach comes from. When you're training an AI model, you train it with positive examples and negative examples.
Yep.
And so the way we've set the expectations for the corporation is, hey, a lot of these deals are not going to win, and we're going to lose money on them.
Yep.
Venture capital is not, a 20%, total gain, total value to paid in capital is not 20%. It's like 2 to 3x, right? And so some are going to lose, and we will learn something. Some will return a little bit of capital, and that's good as shareholders, and some will do really well, and those will make up for the ones that lose money. But even the ones that lose money, we're going to learn something. And it's something that I tell our executives all the time, getting a front row seat to the innovation is so much more valuable than learning about it or reading about it in the Wall Street Journal or the Nikkei. Sitting with these entrepreneurs as they struggle to figure out this market calibrates the corporation to the business that's getting disrupted. And that has been what is incredibly valuable, that you learn about the corporate cultures of the startup, you learn about their creativity, you learn about their speed, you watch them fail right in front of you. And that is incredibly valuable to, there's the idea of innovator's dilemma is, I know Clay Christensen says, well, these companies are focused on their day-to-day business, so they miss the disruption. I think it's a little more subtle than that. I think what happens is, especially those companies that win, it creates a kind of a complacent culture, right? Like if you're winning, and you're watching your business quarter to quarter, you think you're always going to win.
Yep.
And you look at many companies that have, and the list, right? Kodak, IBM, Nokia, RIM, the list goes, GE. These are companies that I don't think kept the hunger and the energy to really look at new markets. And bringing startup DNA to a big company is incredibly valuable to understand the clock speed that a disruptor moves, and to understand how resilient they can be and must be to break into these markets.
Right. I've often kind of had a rule that I try to follow is that I will not back a first-time entrepreneur whose first company was a wild success, because they just expect the next one will. Because I've seen a pattern where the first one works out well, they believe the next one will too, it doesn't. And then the humility comes in, and the third one tends to work out. I want to kind of transition kind of on that topic to some of your investment criteria. And you kind of talk at a high level about teams and business models and markets, but you've got some interesting things that you say about how you select teams or what you look for in a team. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So, since I was on the other side of the table most of my career, it does, obviously, I've had my successes and I've had my failures, and so. And Tom, you're completely right that having a team that can take a punch is so important. And you don't know whether you have a glass jaw until that first punch lands, right? There's that famous Mike Tyson quote that everyone has a fight plan until they get punched in the mouth. And I think that's true with entrepreneurs. And I think I always look at sort of equal measures of curiosity, humility, and confidence. And the latter two are really, I think the first one is table stakes, of course, but the second two are kind of subtle. You want humility to listen to markets, right? And listen to your customers. But you don't want the humility to be so high that it ends up being insecurity, right? Where they're afraid to push forward on something. Because the other side of it is confidence, and you want them to have that confidence, but you don't want that confidence to be so high that it's arrogance, where they don't listen, and I think that that's one thing I always look for. The other thing I look for is team versus hero. Like, I don't like hero teams, and because heroes actually create this really, I think, perverse company culture where, it's sort of the arsonist firefighter syndrome, where you get these, people want to be heroes, so they set fires to something and then they put out the fire and they take a big bow. I like teams that are really cohesive and really collaborative with each other, and the ego isn't so high and I think like we have great technology to spin out of universities, and sometimes the academics that come with the technology often are really smart and they're incredibly accomplished, but they don't understand that they sort of have to supplement their ego in order to build a team and create space to let the other executives and other team members fill that space and perform. Like, as a leader, your job is really set the table and get out of the way. Set the vision and let the team execute on that. And then when they go sideways, you want to help them, figure out the way forward. I think those are really important components to a team that can not just start, but finish.
Yep. Well, I really like what you said. Humility, but not insecurity, and confidence, but not arrogance. And then kind of summarizing that, the courage of convictions, but humility to listen to the market. And that really is a very, very fine balance.
It is.
I know kind of early on in my investing in startups, I found that sometimes I would migrate to individuals or entrepreneurs who kind of, said all the right things, and maybe strayed away from the people who were more edgy and sharp elbows and challenged. But I quickly learned those that were able to spar a little bit, but kind of have the confidence and the convictions, were really the better people to back. So go ahead.
No, I was just gonna, so there's some. I did a blog post on this a few years ago, but there's some great social science study in that you want these teams that, to your point, Tom, that can work well together, that can fight fairly, but you want to stay away from three personality types: slackers, pessimists, and jerks. right? Because what happens with any of those three is those traits tend to metastasize to the rest of the team. They get emulated. Like, if you have a jerk, especially a jerk that's a CEO, everyone becomes a jerk, right? And they become this sort of, they don't fight fair, right? They tend to be autocratic and they don't listen to the market. And of course, the other two are very simple. If you have everyone that's a Debbie Downer, is always negative, they're going to bring everyone down. And obviously, if everyone's not working hard, they're going to look to their left and their right and say, well, they're not working hard, I'm not going to work hard. So these things tend to be contagious. And so you got to kind of watch those negative traits, but I think the positive ones are around fair fighting, not personalizing, ideas might be stupid, but people aren't stupid. Yep. Right? And that's a fine distinction, right? People are not bad. People are not stupid. Ideas can be stupid and people can do bad things, but you gotta be careful not to personalize these kinds of encounters.
Right. Now then talk to me about the importance of a business model. I think I heard you say that, that truly, really is one of the key competitive advantages of the leading tech companies.
Exactly right. I mean, that's just something that as an engineer, you always think that, oh, it's the technology. That's what does it. That's what makes it. Not really. Not really. If you look at, I give this talk where I talk about the music industry. And if you look at when digitizing technology or information theory in the 1940s by Harry Nyquist and Claude Shannon, right, in the 40s, that digitized music. Then you had the CDs in the 70s, and then you had MP3 players in the 90s. All this technology kind of built up to this sort of Cambrian explosion of business models that came in 2000, right? You had Napster, which was illegal, but then you had iTunes and Pandora and Spotify, and now you're even having crypto subscription services, and the business models is really where the value is captured. Yep. And so people ask me, like, for example, Joby is one of is an air taxi electric takeoff and landing company, and they said, well, first of all, there's no AI there, Jim, really, and why'd you invest in it? I said I invested it for two reasons. One is, yeah, it's amazing technology, and they've been developing these vehicles for a decade, but it's the service they want to put around it. They want to save 1 billion people an hour a day. They want to make bumper-to-bumper commutes a thing of the past. This is a business model. This is not, it's enabled by technology, but the value is captured through the business model. Created by the tech, captured by the model. If you don't have the model to capture it, you've just created this amazing hammer, and you're going around looking for nails, and that is not investable.
Yep. And in many cases, the cleverness and the uniqueness of the business model is completely transparent to the customer. A little bit like you look at Costco. I mean, they basically make, half or more of their income just on membership fees. Right. The stuff on the shelves is somewhat incidental. Right. That's an overstatement, but coming up with really a clever, transparent business model is a huge competitive advantage. So we talked about teams, business models. We talked earlier about markets, and you said big enough, ready enough, willing to be fixed. So I don't want to elaborate on that again, but we do have a question from Chris, kind of about that. Chris, why don't you fire away?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. This has been super fascinating. Thank you for your time. And it really just, I'm interested in your thoughts as you go through the current environment and maybe thinking ahead 3, 5, 10 years, and what is really the current example or examples of what voting was like in 2000? What are some industries that are just ripe for disruption but are not quite there yet? And maybe as you look at your deal pipeline, you say, wow, this could be really juicy, but we're just not quite there yet. And maybe it's for air taxis, or maybe it's currencies or other things. I'm just curious to your thoughts of what are maybe the top few examples of what you're seeing out there that are not interesting but not quite there yet.
Yeah. I think everyone talks about AI and it's amazing and it's going to do amazing things, and I think it is. And why I'm so excited about it is we're just really at the beginning of it. So Judea Pearl is this great AI theoretician. And he has this great book called Power of Why, or I think it's Power of Why, I think. And he talks about these 3 levels of artificial intelligence, right? The first one is seeing, the second one is doing, and the third is imagining, right? And we're really only at the seeing level, right? Where most AI models are really just correlation engines, right? You feed them some data, they find the correlations automatically through the training process, and then they apply them to new data coming in a nice generalized way. Okay, great, we do that every day. But the next layer is doing, right? We try something and we see what happens, and then we modify our behavior based on that experiment, right? I have this, I put this video of my cat on Twitter where he's on the counter and he's pushing coins off the table, you know, one after another after another. And what he's doing is he's using the do calculus according to Pearl. He's learning the frictional coefficients and frictional dynamics of coins on a tabletop, right? And he's learning how much does he have to push to get that thing off the table. And it's really that next layer of AI, the doing. And then of course, the last layer is imagining, right? That's like the counterfactuals. That's what people do, right? They imagine a world that doesn't yet exist. And I think that as we ascend that ladder, you're going to see these machines more and more amplify the human experience. And we're not of the opinion certainly our fund is not of the opinion that these machines are going to replace people. I think if you look at, look at autonomy, for example, it's really more about helping cars be safer, not necessarily driving themselves. And we're going to see more and more of that. So I think on the AI side, you're going to see more and more technology unleash more and more business models. And when you see that step change from just the seeing technologies to the doing technologies, you're going to see a huge change in productivity. And then I think in investability too. So we're kind of watching for that. Like, when does that happen? Because I think it's going to open up a whole plethora of new business models in a whole host of different industries. Specifically, if you want to look a little bit more near term than kind of that far out view, we think the pandemic is accelerating a few areas to invest. Personally operated vehicles are just seeing a huge increase in usage. I think obviously when it's personally operated, you're sort of by definition quarantining, and so we have a moped company out of New York called Revel that is rideshare electric mopeds, and they're seeing huge increases in ridership during this period. Toyota and most of the automakers are seeing increased sales during this period. Manufacturing supply chains are, we were all very much focused on a single supply chain, mostly in China. Because of the pandemic and political reasons, we're seeing the fragility of that choice, right? We sacrifice efficiency, we sacrifice resiliency for efficiency, right? We have this very efficient supply chain that can't take a punch, right? So what you're seeing now is like, okay, we're diversifying our supply chains. We're setting up manufacturing lines all over the world. Right before the pandemic, my wife and I were in Morocco, and it's amazing the supply chains and manufacturing facilities that are getting stood up in Northern Africa. And I think you're going to see more of that. And the pandemic, I think it's accelerating that, because you can't put all your eggs in the Chinese basket. You're going to have to move them across. So with that comes a lot of AI, a lot of technologies that are going to be deployed in those new manufacturing and supply chain projects.
That's fascinating. Thank you.
Perfect. We only have a few more minutes here, and I've got a couple of other questions that have come in. Rick Rupp asked the question, what is your geographic focus?
We are global. And so, I mean, we're here located in Silicon Valley, down in south of San Francisco. So most of our investments are in the United States. Although we have a few in Canada, we have 3 in Israel, we have 1 in the UK. We just closed a deal, BIP in Barcelona, Spain. So we're far flung. And I think what's interesting is COVID is actually helping us diversify geographically, because no matter whether you're across town or across the world, this is how we do deals, right? We're looking at everybody on a little square. And I think my opinion is that talent is really evenly spread geographically. Unfortunately, capital is not. Capital tends to be concentrated. But this medium is forcing all of us to take another look at talent that is far flung across the globe. And I think that's really exciting. And it's going to unleash a bunch of new entrepreneurial teams, innovative business models and disruptive technologies, and I'm excited about that.
Good. Dimitri, you had a question.
Hello, Tom.
Hello,
hi,
Dimitri.
Jim. Thanks for your time today. Very exciting to hear your story. James, this is Dimitri Itzkos with First Interstate Bank, and James Krejci. We're both commercial lenders here in Spokane, and James has a question.
Yes, hello. We're in the same room, about 6.5 feet apart here. But my question is there a point in which, in terms of decision making, in which the value of human involvement outweighs the value of additional AI?
Yeah, that's a really profound question, actually. You know, there's I'm a big student of you know, optimization theory, and the question is, you know, is there enough compute power to completely supplant human involvement? And you know, I'm of the opinion that the answer to that is no. I think that humans, something's going on that we don't understand. It's the ability for us to quickly intuit the value of something without going through a hugely laborious analysis. Now, of course, you know, you got to go through the analysis too, but there's always that intangible level of intuition. I think that's important. The same question, I think, translates to in-person versus technology connection, right? I have this theory that, you know, we do email, we do chat, we do, you know, this kind of Zoom stuff, you know, will it ever approach an in-person engagement? And I think it's sort of asymptotically moving toward this level of connection that is in person, but there's going to be a gap. And I think no matter how good the technology is, VR and AR and all this stuff, my sense is that there's always something intangible that is almost at the, you know, the subatomic level, something in the universe we haven't really yet discovered that that makes those interactions unique and special and insightful. And I think the same thing goes into decision making. You can get there, you can get 95% of the way there maybe with analysis, but that last 5% is often, I think, going to be human informed.
Excellent. Well, unfortunately, it's a minute after 1 o'clock, and I really try to keep everybody to an hour, both for your benefit and for everybody on the call. Although I have a lot more things I wanted to address, maybe we'll just have to get you back again sometime next year.
I would love it, Tom. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for having me, and great to reconnect. This has just been a joy. So thanks so much.
Yeah, well, thanks you. Everybody. And it's very possible we might be back at you with a couple of opportunities here in Spokane. And then kind of one last question. I did see that you kind of had a call for innovation for smart and connected cities. Is that still a current initiative, or is that something that was earlier this year or last year?
Yeah, so we did the call for innovation. It was our second one where we sort of call out to the startup community on what we're looking for. The first one was about robotic manipulation. This one was for smart and connected cities. And that ran from January. We usually only run them 3 months, but we ran this one for 6 months because of COVID. Yep. And we announced it's not really a contest. It's just a way for startups to know what we're looking for. And we're still doing smart and connected city investments. Okay. But this was just a way to kind of encourage the startup community to come to us. And it was great. We announced our first investment in that area with a Canadian company called YPC Technologies for robotic meal making, you know, sort of your personal chef, which is very, very interesting company out of Montreal. Okay, good. Well, Jim, thank you very much. Thanks everybody else for attending today. And we're working on our program for next year. So stay tuned and have a great Thanksgiving. Yeah, have a great Thanksgiving, everyone. Take care. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Paul. Bye-bye.
Is this thing going on?
Yes, it is, Jeff. We're watching you, man. Be careful what you say.
What I wanted to say to you was when can we get together like we talked about before? Is there?
Send me an email or LinkedIn.